Can I ask people to come up front? Thank you, because otherwise it's going to feel like a we're talking to you all across this distance. So if y'all can come up front and settle down, oh, that'll be lovely. Yeah.
तो कुछ भी नहीं करना मैडम। हेलो चेक।
On my knees.
Finish this side.
Just
साड़ी
no?
माइक अंदर
Okay. Nicha.
हेलो हेलो चेक। हेलो हेलो चेक। हेलो 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 हेलो
Hello, hello, one, hello, hello.
बदलेगा check
Hello, hello, hello.
So let's start. Good evening and welcome to a somewhat unusual asset event, unusual time, unusual location, unusual format. So that's what asset is about. Every time rediscovers itself to kind of bring some newer things into it. So I hope you'll all like it in this kind of a format where there's a much larger, closer, I think, interaction with the speaker. I mean, of course, in this case, it is a fireside chat, but without fire. Uh, so, and welcome everybody here. And of course, we did have a few such events based on, by the authors on their books and so on in the past. I know Sridhar's twice written we had some time ago, and we also had one by Harish Mehta some time ago on his book and so on. But I think what makes this particular event somewhat unique, apart from what I said in terms of location and time and so on, is this is by one of our TFR family members, and more importantly, the one across the Homi Baba Road, if that is anything to kind of say specially. And the one whose book is really, I think, creating big waves, both in the authors, writers cycle, as well as in the print media. So it's a great pleasure to invite today Smriti Ravindra for this particular event. She's a Fulbright scholar and holds an MFA in creative writing from North Carolina. Her fiction and journalism books on those have already been published globally, including both in US, Canada, and Nepal, and so on. And this particular book, The Woman Who Climbed the Trees, is first novel. Uh, other speaker, I can say, I don't need to probably introduce much, but I think it is a formality, I should say. Vidita is a neuroscientist. In fact, her main interest is in research on mental health. She's a professor and head of the Department of Biological Sciences. She warned me not to kind of read much more, but I have to advertise about asset. So she's going to give our fourth asset colloquium next month, almost exactly 1 month from now. So that is a big advertisement on my book. I think without taking more of both of their time. So it's over to Vidita.
Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see this unusual format for the asset. And you also know that when we have asset colloquia, you can be counted on that Satya will always respond by allowing all flexibility in these colloquia events. And so that's been the joy of always being able to ask Satya. This started as a conversation that I had with Smriti, where I said, I love the book, and where's the rest of it? Because I wanted more. And so in the process, we were talking, and I said, why don't we do something here? And she said, I would love to do one in the foyer. So I'm really glad that Satya could make this happen. Um, before we kickstart, I'm going to do a pitch. There are books right there. I have devoured mine. I hope many of you who are here have actually read the book, and those of you who haven't, perhaps this is the appetizer to you considering getting some of those books. Yeah, they're out here. But let me dive straight into it and tell you about this incredible book, and why should I be the one speaking to Smriti? It's not like I am a journalist, or I'm just a average reader who happened to love this book. But it felt to me like a book that was profoundly about mental health, written in the most lyrical, poetic style with immense empathy that was woven through every moment of that book. And so it's a real privilege to be able to talk to Smriti about this book. We'll start with a reading by Smriti. And you have your own copy. Fantastic. So Smriti said she would read us the prologue.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for coming. I'm a little bit nervous, so if I make a slight fool of myself, please forgive. But yes, I'm going to read from the prologue because I don't want to give away too much of the book, and this is just the start of the book, and because it's something that's short enough and can be read in the entirety. So yes, and I hope it acts as a good teaser for you. The prologue and the epilogue are named The Woman Who Climbed Trees, and that's where the book gets its name from. A man had 2 children, and one day his wife died. So the man went looking for another wife, but no woman would be burdened by the children, and the man remained unmarried for some years. Then one day, the man went to a neighboring village for some work and heard of a family that had a girl of marriageable age. After he had finished his work, the man went up to the family's house and made inquiries about the girl's age, color, and robustness. Satisfied, he offered himself as a groom. He had wealth, he said, and lots of youth left in him. He would take care of the girl, and the girl would take care of the children. Show me the children, the girl said. And the man brought his children with him during his next visit. When the girl looked at the children, she fell in love with them. They were good children, shy and calm. They had beautiful, sad eyes, like those of orphans, and they tugged at her heart, and so the girl married the man. For many years, the girl was mother to the sad-eyed children, and eventually their eyes began to glow with joy. They learned mischief, learned songs and dances, played in the fields. They learned to chase after carts and birds. Eventually, they forgot their birth mother and thought of the girl as their real mother. They grew up well, 2 handsome children. One night, the man could not sleep. It was a moon-filled night, and the rays fell silver upon his wife. The tree outside knocked at the window, quiet and musical. The man stayed up, enjoying the night, and when, around an hour after midnight, his wife pushed aside the covers and stepped off the bed, the man was surprised. The girl put on her slippers. She made her way out of the room and toward the front door. She stepped out of the house and disappeared. The man stayed behind, confused. The girl returned with the early hours. She did the same the next day, then the day after. The man was very disturbed by his wife's behavior and decided to follow her. One night, after much thought, he tied a thread to the tip of his wife's hair and held the spool in his hand. When she left the bed, the thread on the spool began to unwind and started a white path behind her. After a good interval had passed, the man followed the thread path. The thread went down the lane that crossed the fields and a cluster of huts. It went past the bazaar, past the temple, and followed the river. It stopped by a large peepal tree and climbed its bark. The man was puzzled. What could this mean? Why had the thread climbed the tree? He looked up, and sure enough, there was his wife, up on the tree, sitting on its branches, enjoying the wind and the stars. The man hid himself behind some bushes, and when he saw his wife readying to leave, he rushed back home. For a month after that, he followed her every night, and every night the girl climbed the tree and sat on its branches. Her feet dangled under her sari. Some nights she let down her hair, and her hair fell like a waterfall upon her back. The girl was beautiful, and the man was severely in love with her. But despite all this, he was also tormented. What could this mean? What could this mean? Finally, he began to talk about his wife with others. He told his friends, his sisters-in-law, his brothers. Word spread. Ah, said the people, she must be having an affair. But after many nights of watching the tree, it was clear there was no affair. She must be mad, said others. But all day the girl worked with such surety and skill that insanity had to be ruled out. Then someone said, she must be a witch. Think of it, said someone. We cannot understand anything she does. Why did she marry this man, someone so much older than her? Why did she choose not to have her own children and raise somebody else's? Why do these children love her so? Why does she look more beautiful at night than in the mornings? Why does she sit high in a tree? Nobody could answer. The man thought hard about it and decided it was time to let the children know. She does not love you, he said. She is a witch. That is not true, cried the children. She loves us. She feeds us sweets, stitches our clothes, gives us baths, sends us to school, strokes our hair until we fall asleep, and sings in our sleep so we dream sweet. She loves us. Does she? Asked the man. Come with me and I will show you. So he took the children along the next night and showed them the girl. She was upon the branches, light as a bird, her hair blowing in the wind, her skin without wrinkles. Now, said the man, is that a woman or is that a witch? The children stared. They had never seen their mother so lovely, so without worry, so far away, as though she cared nothing for them or anything they knew. She is a witch, they said, and returned home with their father. The next night, the man, the children, the friends, the sisters-in-law, the brothers, and the elders of the village surprised the wife by springing out of the bushes. When the wife fell off the branch, they gave her a good beating. The wife stared at her husband and said nothing. But when she saw her children, she began to weep. Save me, she cried. But the children, who had never seen their mother so beautiful, could not step forward. They looked away and stared into the distance in fear. They pushed their fingers into their ears so they would not hear her scream. Then the villagers carried her to the river. The children stared into the distance. Thrashing under the water, nor did they hear the silence when it came.
That start doesn't prepare you for all that has to follow sometimes. I remember reading this and thinking to myself, my God, because it's a hit to the belly, literally, like a punch. There's so much myth and reality interwoven through your entire book. How did you keep those stories separate? Because they don't separate themselves out in the entire series of stories that follow. Every chapter has a bit of myth, a bit of reality. And sometimes when you're following that track, you don't know whether you're on the side of myth or reality. How did you keep them separate? Or did you not even bother? Was it like the barber's wife? The story told itself.
I would like to say that, but no, I think folk tales are my favorite kind of stories because they're the most unedited form of stories. And I've worked a lot with folk tales. In my younger years, I actually worked as a translator who used to translate folk tales from Maithili to English. I still do that. So also I come from the Mithila belt, and storytelling is an everyday part of our life. So I think I grew up with stories, but I also grew up with English literature, which is not folksy at all. It's very, the English literature I grew up on is very structured. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has a conflict. So my mind is actually trained to think like that. And in an MFA, that's what you get trained to do that. And I think when I was writing, every now and then I would feel that I was writing like someone else. And the more I wanted to write like myself, the more I had to turn folksy and turn to folk stories. And that's, I don't know. Yeah.
Actually, I had a series of questions, but you've taken me to the natural question, which is further down, which was that I felt whenever I was reading the book that while there are Indian authors or Indian authors from the subcontinent, more often than not, there is always an element of translating for English reading audience and also perhaps an international audience. One of the things I felt throughout reading your entire book was it was like it's an Indian book. It's a subcontinent book. It's a Nepali book. It's a book that speaks to people from the subcontinent because there are things like, misdemeanor, blaming, gaming, shaming, blaming, this sort of double word play, which is so common in India that there's so many places and there's no attempt to break it down and translate it. It will be immediately identified by somebody who lives within the subcontinent. But I was wondering what that you think, did you try to do it or did you not bother?
I think when I was writing, the one thing I kept telling myself is, first of all, I didn't know it would get published. So so since I didn't think it would get published. So then I wasn't writing for an audience. Most of the time I would tell myself, okay, today I'm writing and this is an improvement of my craft. So I was writing for myself. Also, my favorite authors in the world are the people who've not written for audiences. Kafka, Dickinson, they wrote for themselves and they put their work under their mattresses and died. Now, I am a materialist person. I do not want to put my
We're
stuff.
pitching the book. It's out
We're
there.
pitching the book.
Yeah.
It's right there. Do buy, right? Very materialist. I don't want to leave my book under the mattress and die. But at the same time, I also know that innovation comes when you stop thinking about the audience. The moment you think of the audience, you grow afraid. And my editor actually asked me to translate. She was quite adamant. And then I kept saying, this is it. I won't translate. You take it or you leave it. Thank God she took it. And so, yes.
Because it's striking. It's something anyone from the subcontinent will instantaneously identify with, including those of us who are trying to figure out who the actors were in specific scenes and trying to say, who is this person and what era and time is this? And who's this Indian actor that has caused, the Nepali cinema to
It's
get
Hrithik
burned?
Roshan.
Yeah, I know, I asked you. I wanted to know who it was.
It's Hrithik Roshan.
So the other thing I was struck by, and my favorite character, perhaps in your entire book, is potentially a bird. I think I might officially love that character the most, the abusive parrot, because it breaks all rules. Clearly, it's the one that's not controlled by any patriarchal construct whatsoever. The parrots have a gender in the book?
I have no clue. I don't know. But I do know that it's a very Mufat parrot.
It's a parrot that has absolutely no control in any circumstance and just says whatever it wants to say without any worry at all.
Well,
It's the only one that breaks away from the patriarchy, and it's bird.
and it's in a cage.
Yep.
So I don't know how much of a breaking away really happens for the poor parrot. It's a parrot that's fed chilies so it can have a shrill voice. The parrot is also amongst my favorite. So there's a very abusive, blasphemous, slightly sacrilegious parrot in the book, who has a very vulgar tongue. And it was a lot of fun to write. Mostly because when I first started writing the parrot, it was a pretty tame parrot. And then every time I wanted to make it not so tame, and then all my deepest vulgarities I have put on the parrot. So it's a delightful parrot, yes.
It is a very delightful.
But it is in a cage, and I think that's
Yes,
something.
it's emblematic of the fact that the entire book is in a patriarchal backdrop, and no one really is potentially free in any of it, including the men actually in the story as well. So which is
patriarchy. Yeah, which is
patriarchy.
So-
So I wanted to ask you, did you make up all the myths, or 70% of the myth, or are they like myths that came out of your head, or are they myths that exist in Nepal, India, that bits of pieces? What?
So some are, of course, completely borrowed, like the Ram and Sita is something everyone will recognize. But I would say 80% of them I made up, or let's say, for instance, in Kathmandu, there's a street called Thamel, and it's a street, it used to be called the Freak Street when we were growing up. Now it's called Thamel. And it was the Freak Street because all the hippies used to visit it. And it was considered dangerous for Nepali boys to go there because the hippie girls will then, take you and then make you have a good time, which is not allowed. So then everyone was forbidden from going there, and they would often say, don't go in a motorcycle. If you go to that area in a motorcycle, then a woman will climb at the back of your motorcycle, and then instead of giving you a good time, will actually suck your blood and kill you. And so growing up, we all grew up with this weird, because when you're children, you don't understand that these are fear tactics. You think they are real. So we grew up thinking, in Nepali, a chudel is called a kichkandi. So we all grew up thinking ki in that street, the kichkandi comes and she will come and she'll get onto your motorcycle. My brothers were terrified, poor things. So that has become a part of the myth, but then it's a small part of the myth, right? So like that.
But it's so interwoven that sometimes it's hard to separate. I mean, I love the mythical parts of this book. There are many of them, and they interweave in the middle of so many of the stories, and they're really an integral part of the book. I can see why they are so required, because they're also a step away from sometimes the profound tragedy of the events that are playing out in the human beings' lives. And then suddenly there's a moment of myth. So there's a chance to separate and to move away, and then still continue to, navigate that. One thing I noticed throughout is that your escape is always nature in this book. For every one of your characters, there is an escape to some, I mean, either be it the farm or be it to like the tree is the prologue, but throughout, is that something you consciously did, or it just came that way?
Well, I didn't do it consciously, but my father's family is a farming family. My dadaji is a farmer. My daddy is a farmer. My mother is a voracious gardener. We had 50 fruit trees in our small little compound, and I don't think we ever bought vegetables, ever, when we were growing up. And we had more plum than we knew what to do with. So we used to take our plums and take it to the market and exchange it for meat. So farming has been a part of our thing. So because I borrowed so much from life, I think it just became a part of the book, that farming is a part of the book.
It's very much so, and it's quite incredible, because there's also the story about a giant cucumber that gets Pirti or Preeti beaten up because she passes it on. That's an interesting story, because it's the standard story of every household where somebody sends you a gift which you don't want to consume, and so you recycle it.
That's Indian.
It's
That's the Indian story.
Condition, but you never let it be known that you are. I mean, it must be that you grew the cucumber yourself, toiled over it. But then Priti absolutely broke that rule and got slammed.
Chappal se maar pada.
And that's the other thing. There is like solid beating in this. People get beaten literally with chappal. People are properly beaten.
मैंने बचपन में बहुत मार खाया है. That also comes out.
It's striking because you notice it throughout. So the other thing is there's a huge political backdrop to this, but it's not timed political backdrop. So you leave your readers trying to guess what era this is.
Actually, if you were a Nepali, you'd know bang. Yeah. So I've had very interesting feedback. I'm getting feedback from the US, from the West. And the West, I have two kinds of feedback. Love it, or what is going on? I don't understand what's happening. What are these stories? And so that's one. Then there is the feedback from India, which has been actually wonderful and very positive. And then there's the feedback from Nepal, where they're like, this incident didn't happen here. You have messed up this timeline. I had somebody get really angry and say, Hrithik Roshan happened in 2000. You have put him in 1990. So it depends on who you are. If you're a Nepali, not...
Yeah, I had to find Rajiv Gandhi to start putting it into some sort of a timeline.
Yeah, for a Nepali reader, the timelines would be very clear. But I don't like dates, so then I didn't put them.
So when you created the I mean, since the backdrop of this book is so much of a patriarchal construct, it also has the political backdrop of the power struggle between the big bully and the smaller. So there is the India bully and Nepal at the receiving end. There's the Pahadis versus the Madeshis. There is the men versus the women. There's the women and grandmothers and mothers versus the kids. So at each level, there is a power struggle that's throughout this book. And the only time it equalizes is in female friendships. So I was wondering whether you wanted to comment on that. And it transiently equalizes. So that's a theme that's there in each of the equations that are there through the whole book.
Well, I think it's a very lucky human being who escapes a power struggle in life. Power dynamics are all around us. I do feel that there is immense space for freedom within female friendships. Like, I think that's my favorite thing in the world. But I also know that most relationships are, they're built in such a way that you're pitted against each other. And in the book also, the females' friendships don't survive, because for that kind of a genderless friendship to exist, I guess patriarchy has to die down first. And that's not going to happen anytime too soon. And as far as power dynamic goes, I really, really think it's a blessed few in the world who get to experience such a free life. I mean, show of hands, I don't know how many people feel that they've not encountered that, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's striking. There's also this beginning where you have, of course, when Meena is getting all of her shringar done, and the story is being told to her by the barber's wife. There is this, the story must tell itself. So I want to ask you, how long has the story been telling itself? Just to get a sense of how long have you been putting words on paper, and can you share with us the journey of writing this and then editing it? Because I'm sure you got attached to the words and the chapters that didn't end up in the book. There are many of us who'd love to read some of those as well, because we'd like backdrops of other characters, what else was going on. But how long did this whole thing take?
15 years. So I started the book actually in 2008, 7, 8, somewhere around that time. And 2007 is when my son was born, which means that I became a mother and I started the process of laboring over a book, which meant, of course, that for many years I had no time to write. So I wouldn't write. And then there would be this desire to write, and then I'd sit down and write a lot for a few months. And then again, I wouldn't write. And then, you have a full-time job, you have a child to raise, you have a family, and you're doing this on the side. So it took a long time. But in a way, I'm really happy it took that long, because I don't know, so many things collected in me, and then it became a part of the book. So I'm glad that that happened. The editing, I think the COVID was a small blessing in its own way, because that's when I put the book together during the COVID years, because TV kitna dekhenge na, to thoda bore ho gaya TV dekh ke. So then instead of that, put the book together. So that took about 2.5 years to put the book together. Yeah.
Book is as old as Arya.
Yes, the book is as old as Arya. Arya, say hi.
So how many pages did you write? So that I want to know how many this is
400 pages.
400. So I want to know what.
I think I have another 500-600 on my computer, but I had to end somewhere.
So who did the editing? Did you chop?
I
Did you edit?
chopped. I chopped. My editor was actually wonderful in the sense that she didn't ask for much edits. She gave me no control over the cover and no control over the name of the book, but gave me control over the content. So I was like, okay, fine. You take the name, you take the cover.
So what happens to those remaining 400, 500 pages? Is there a sequel? Is there a, those of us there, so there, I'll tell you that this was I called Smriti when I finished the book, and I said, how can it be over? Because I wanted to know what was going to happen to some of these characters right at the end. And I just didn't feel like I had finished hearing about their story. So I was like, can you just give me a few of those things to read so I find out what
I'll
actually
email them
happened?
to you.
But do you think you'll write a sequel? Have you had others ask you for more, or what has your feedback been
No,
from
so,
different readers?
people have asked me for more. My publisher has asked me for my next book, so that's a good sign.
Excellent.
Yes, and I'm. Thank you. So I do want to write, but I need to figure a way out. I think balancing a job, because writing is a full-time job in itself, that's a little difficult. So the day I figure that out, I'll start the next one. I have to figure that out. All of you, please buy the book, then I'll have money to figure it out.
Okay, so I thought that rather than just us talking, it'd be nice to get
Yeah.
some participation. I think one of your first readers and one of your students is here. So Asmi, will you speak a little bit and tell us about that and what it was like? That would be nice. Asmi is actually acknowledged in the book as one of her early readers and also a student. So I think it'll be lovely to get her perspective.
Is it all right if I speak from here? So I had like the great privilege of, during the COVID years, like you mentioned, going to her house every day and reading the drafts because I think you were so tired of looking at the screen. You just wanted someone to like say it to you. And I was very grateful to see an author work that closely. And so I've read some of your short stories in school that you shared with us. And I could see, snippets of work the things that you've worked on for like, for decades coming together in a book. And I think that was so great. I remember telling you when I read one of the first drafts, it made me nostalgic for a time that I never knew. And I think that was like really special. I think you've written so lucidly, but there's still so much depth and, character and richness to the book, which I really appreciated. I think in a way, the story is so universal. It's something I think, we as women especially, we either see or we are preparing ourselves to like enter like as a young woman. And so at times it was a bit daunting, a bit jarring, but the writing itself was so lyrical and so poetic. You sort of just you're lulled into that. So yeah, it's such a privilege to like read it and like in the first draft and then to see it published as well.
Yeah, thank you. Asmi, actually, during the COVID, I got to a point where if I had to read one word of this book, I'd shoot my brains out. So then I called Asmi and I said, will you read it aloud so that I can just hear it and I don't have to look at the screen anymore? So she read the entire book aloud to me. And I would tell her, okay, delete this word, add this word. And she did all of that. So thank you so much.
What a phenomenal experience that must have been, Asmi. I know, to have a chance to like ringside view of an author's process. There's Sumana sitting right behind you, and Sumana is one of our leading journalists and also someone who has reviewed Smriti's book and written about it. So I'd love to get Sumana in on the conversation and ask her what were the things that she felt when she read it, and her conversation, share a bit of her conversations with Smriti on this as well.
As someone who also writes, I think it's like a really feat of storytelling. It's the way she has woven, the myths, the songs, and the narrative. And and also the way she has managed to give psychological depth to the characters while keeping the story moving. Because just technically speaking, it's a feat of a book. And you can tell that it has so many layers. So you can tell that it has pickled in her mind for a very long time. And there's also humor. I mean, what I found is that even in the most tragic or tragic portions, it also got humor in it. The absurdity of oppression. So I think that was something that really, and I agree with you, she's made absolutely no concessions to the Western audience. I've told her that. And and that's what also lends it its power, because it's got such a integrity to it.
It's very refreshing to see a book written without necessarily that attempt to. I was struck by it, that there wasn't an attempt, and I think it would have lost the power of those sentences. If the 2 sentences later there was an attempt to translate it to someone who doesn't potentially have. So I was amazed by the fact that given this launched in the US first, that your editor was also brave enough in a sense to, it is a subcontinent book in that there will be things that speak to you instantaneously, which could potentially get lost in translation. Sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, just one more thing that obviously she has really explored the female characters, but like but like you also pointed out, the main men, she's also tried to show their helplessness to some extent, and but then there is a power dynamic between the men and the women, and their frustrations are basically targeted at the women to some extent, and they suffer. So and the weaving of the personal and the political, because the main character, the main male character is oppressed in the public sphere, and that has a resonance in the private. So nothing that she does in the book is like overt, like, hey, like, look, I'm mixing the personal and the political. So that's the feat. That's what the achievement of the book is, that everything is woven into a gripping story. And so that's, I think, what I find exceptional about the book.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a book in which all of those things come very organically. I was also struck by the fact that it has such a profoundly empathetic look at mental health. And I was really struck by that because it takes a lot for an author to retain that and transmit that to the reader, where the reader is infused with a certain empathy for the challenges of a psychotic break. And that's rather remarkable and pretty unusual to see. I'm curious to know from you whether you have had feedback from people. I mean, of course, anecdotal, but just something where they felt seen and heard, because I think this is rather remarkable. It's woven through the entire story that you continue even in the worst of the psychotic symptoms to feel profound empathy for the person who is obviously going through them, where there is an escape available in psychosis from the reality of the pain of the world. So it's really well written in terms of what it conveys empathetically. So I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I'm glad that it comes across that way. I've had many women write to me, and some call me, and a few who've had an hour-long conversation with me saying, I felt this way, but I did not know I felt this way. And it was really, I think that's been the most amazing thing, because I've had people I don't know send me messages over Facebook and Instagram just to say that this section, I did not realize I've actually felt all these emotions, and I did not know I felt all these emotions. As far as empathy goes, I'm a woman. I empathize with women, but I also empathize with men, because it's not easy, I think, to constantly, probably also to be in power and to know sometimes, I don't know. But anyways, I've seen enough women go through either very overt mental breakdowns, which are recognized as mental breakdowns, or actually just live with this thing that we have to get through this. And with people, someone was talking to me about pregnancy and morning sickness, and telling me that, I was sick, and my husband told me, but that is just psychological. As though, even if it is, let's say that were true, that still does not make it not real. Just because something is in the mind, which it is not. I was pregnant, I was very sick physically. But let's say I was physically sick because my mind was making me sick. That does not make it not real. It's still real. So this constantly telling women that you are crazy, this is all in your head, as though that stops it from being real, I find the most confusing statement in the world. I feel like telling people, but if, yeah. And since the main character eventually goes mad, her madness is real. Just because somebody else cannot see the things she sees doesn't make it not real. So
I'll pitch my ACID colloquium next month by saying it's going to be about altered perception and reality with serotonergic psychedelics. So reality is anyway only an agreed upon construct. It's only a agreed, collective agreed upon construct. So it's overrated. I mean, reality is what you collectively decide to call reality. So yeah. I want to open this up to the audience with people who might have questions. I also am going to say, please get your autograph book, because Smriti is our big emerging star from TIFR, and nice to keep one in your bookshelf. But if there's questions for her and people would like to ask, please, you may have, yeah, there's one right back there from Pratap. Can we pass the mic back? Yeah, Pratap.
You have many small anecdotes like the one which is the cucumber story. Now, as someone who spends a lot of time on Facebook, I don't know whether I should admit it here. Many of these stories I have read it in your Facebook posts earlier. And when, of course, I read it, I didn't know you were writing the book. So was it snippets from your book, or at that time you were recollecting your own experiences?
So no, like the cucumber one actually started as a conversation amongst us girlfriends. We were all sharing stuff, and I don't know, we were in Garima's house, I think. And that thing came up, and Garima said, "Oh, you should write this for your Facebook post because it's so funny." So then I wrote a post on Facebook. And then the book started getting too dark, and I was like, "Oh my God, I need a comic relief." And then it went into the book. So yeah, many steps. So anything I wrote on Facebook actually was for Facebook, and then became, yeah.
So I'm just going to, it's a comment. It's not a question. But I mean, I have known Smriti very closely for years. So yes, I have the privilege to be very close to the emerging star and all that. But anyway, my comment is that, we have had many conversations. So when I read the book, I'm still reading the book, by the way, but I mean, for me, it's so clear. It's, the book, I can just see those words emerging out of her mouth. Like for me, it's not written. It's like how she talks, the conversations, so it's like, I think it's maybe because I know her well, but I think it's incredible that, a written book and something where a lot of planning has gone into, a lot of editing has gone into. I think it's remarkable that the book still retains that freshness, that aspect. It's like almost like a conversation, to have a conversation with Smriti, which is something which I absolutely loved about the book. And on a lighter note, I also loved the liberal use of the word donkey in the book, because we have all heard growing up, someone or the, I mean, all parents have always called us gadhis and gadhas and all that. So that was very refreshing. So yeah.
Yeah, I got called Gadha Kahin Ka all the time. So Gadha
There's a
has
question
become.
back there from Shubha.
Hi, Smriti. I mean, wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank
I have
you.
a little question. If you were to come up, you must have come up with 5 alternate titles.
Yes.
In that, the title is a teaser for the book. What does your heart extract in terms of titles?
So the book, when I sold it, was called The Geography of Loss. And a title I had before that was Slipping Geography, because it's really about, it's also a book about migrants, right? And it's a book about diaspora. So it was Slipping Geography. And one of my students read the title and said, "My God, this sounds like a thesis." So then I was like, okay, oh, this sounds like a geography thesis. Do you really want that? So that got out of the window. And then I fell very hard for the geography of loss. And I really wanted that. And then my editor said, "We are living through COVID. If you use the word loss, nobody is going to buy the book." So then I was like, okay. And the woman who climbed trees was something that didn't feature at all with me. It's my editor's pick. And I'm really glad that this happened, because so much of the book is about fantasy, and most of the fantasies are taking place on trees. So it kind of makes sense. And the prologue is called The Woman Who Climbed Trees. The epilogue is called The Woman Who Climbed Trees. Obviously, subconsciously, that meant something to me, but I never proposed it as a book title.
You're from.
Just a small question. I wanted to know what were the challenges you faced with, writing about or portraying mental illness in your characters, and also just writing about it. Because I've not read as much, but I haven't, r- read mental illness portrayed like this. I think it reminded me a bit of M in the Big Home, like Jerry Pinto's M in the Big Home. But other than that, like I think there was so much empathy I felt for, the victim of the illness, even though she was doing very, very, mean and rude and cruel things to like her children and like to the people around her. I was just wondering, like while writing it, did you face any challenges?
I did. Actually, it was quite difficult to write because I don't know, like the person I'm writing about has she's schizophrenic. She's also neurotic. Uh, and I don't know about these things. So I had to read a lot to get a sense of what it was. But I also had to, of course, go back and write about people I know who've been mentally unwell. And I realized that the best way to do that is to just stay honest to how I experience that person experiencing it. But it was a little, I kept feeling like, you know how when you're writing about something you don't know, you wonder if you're being a fraud. That's a sense I still feel like, even though the book is out, I still feel that have I been, well, I can't be authentic since it's not mine to be authentic about, but have I at least been fair? And I don't know I don't know the answer to that question. I tried. And I think I read a lot to understand. And I tried very hard to stay very, very true to the person I was writing about. And yes. And to remind myself that just because somebody is unwell, you don't stop loving them. You just love them anyway.
So this is more of a comment than a question, but like Devjani auntie, I also have the privilege of knowing Smriti auntie or Miss Smriti. She was my English teacher in school for 2 years. And I know usually it's the teacher who is like proud of the student. But I think this is an instant where the student was proud of the teacher. And as the book got published, and I'm still halfway through reading it, and the more I read it, the prouder I get, and the more lucky I feel to have been taught English by you. Yeah, everyone go buy the book.
Picking up of what Asmi said, I agree, because that was the one thing that struck me. It's rare to retain the human being over and above the illness. And Smriti does that remarkably. So you continue to see the person over and above the psychosis, and that person doesn't get erased by the psychosis. And that is a rather remarkable feat to pull off, because it's hard to not totally make the individual about the illness and to retain the human being that is still there underlying all of that. And that is, I actually, as someone who has been researching the mental health space, I think it's actually unusual for a novelist to pull that off. I don't think it will be that common, because more often than not, the illness consumes especially a psychosis event, which is so large, and we're not talking about anxiety and depression, but psychosis, it can consume everything, that the person is just submerged under the scale of the illness. And that somehow doesn't happen, because she and her character just, despite that illness, rise through like the remarkableness of that human being actually still comes through. So that's pretty profound. I thought that was really, really the best part of the book for me. I really loved it. Well, we can take some more questions, or we can just shoot the breeze, but I think we're coming to a natural point at which we'll be starting to wrap up. Satya? Yeah. Yeah, we can take a few more questions if people want to ask Smriti. This is, how often do we have authors who've lived in our midst, have gestated a book for as long as we have seen Arya probably floating around, and we have a chance to pick Smriti's brain. So even if you've not read the book, it's fine. Just dive in. Okay. So then I think yeah, Satya has a question, of course.
No,
He has
no,
the privilege of it.
This is very, maybe not at the level of what other questions are. It's a very funny question. So what is the role of Ravi in this book?
Well, actually, the role of a family member is tremendous in any creative endeavor. It cannot happen without them. Um, so the role of Ravi is that, first of all, a very technical role of Ravi is my grammar sometimes really goes for a toss. And Ravi has been my editor. He has to go through all my work. Uska khud ka naukri kya होएगा भगवान जाने. But उसको मेरा सब edit करना है, सब पढ़ना है. Otherwise, I throw a fit. I get really angry about it, and I accuse him of not being a good husband. So he's terrified. So he reads everything.
The grammar not him.
No, he's the grammar Nazi. So he's my everything. He's been the constant that has allowed this book to happen. Actually, he and Arya, both of them. Arya is just all the comic relief comes when I'm interacting with Arya. Then all the comedy comes into the book because it's coming with him. But yeah, they are. Without them, it can't be. It just cannot be.
So the hidden agenda was I wanted to kind of you say that Ravi has a big role in this book. And if I don't ask this question, maybe it would not have come out.
No, he has a big role in the book.
Just on the, completely on the left. Just for fun.
Yeah.
Ah, that is a good one too. Complementary to the earlier question. Can you please pass on?
Yeah, well, yeah. Satya, did you want her to say that I wrote the book actually? No, yeah. See, I definitely helped with the editing, and I was terrified. I was terrified that I would appear in some character in the book, and one of my colleagues here would recognize me. So I made sure
He behaved well.
I behaved well. And
I think when she was talking about what, like, she said that I was also important to the book, she was really like overestimating it. Like maybe I was there in some stories, but I saw how much she was working for the book, and she's been working like every day for like months and months and years actually. So it's been really like interesting to see her work and like how hard she's working.
He has never said this to me, huh? Ever. This is the first time I'm hearing of it.
this is the best.
That so that it can be played back
It's
to him
in
later.
public.
Just make
It's in
sure.
public.
Yeah.
Arya, you've said it in public.
No,
It is in YouTube now.
Work so hard, so you know.
Yeah, I'll pick up these with him at home.
I think we should close.
And I get you to sign on.
Yeah,
Do I say well done?
She has a this was bought by Alinu, so I want a more personal signature than that here. That is yours. And I hope many of you all are going to continue that and get some and get her autograph.
Okay, I think while she's signing book, I must also do this pleasant duty of honoring both Smriti and Vidita. Some of you might know the particular forum called Asset is completed 40 years. So to commemorate that, we designed a memento. So that we decided to give to all the speakers, all the people who actually give talks this year. So this one goes to Smriti.
Thank you.
I think you can take it down. Thank you. One is for a wonderful visitor who really brought the best out of this book and actually introduced the way what a neuro scientist will do. And I think it was I couldn't expect any. I couldn't really imagine any better person to be in conversation with the author.
Thank you. I also big applause for Sakya because Asset is my favorite colloquia forum in this institute and is a common thought for many of us because Asset has turned out to be one of the fora in which we all really enjoy the variety of speakers that you bring. So big applause for Sakya. Thank you so much.
Okay. So thank you also all of you, even though it is evening at 6 and but I think this kind of a setup system, I think it helps people to kind of interact with personally and very closely. And once in a while we'll do such events as well so that it brings a more closer interaction between the, let us say, speaker, author, whatever, and the audience. Thank you once again. Good night.